So I'll start with a brief introduction. Our time is short. I've done this talk at an MBF before. If you were in Texas last March, you heard a very similar kind of thing. I've got some new material to add because, of course, new studies are coming out all the time. But I mentioned that I did this before because the very inspiring thing is that we scheduled for 1 hour for that presentation. And I was there for almost 3 hours. And so that was my first shot at seeing just how interested our Yoga Fit Network is in the research on the therapeutic benefits of yoga. And so that's, I mean, I could use a bunch of cliches, right? Like, oh, that's music to my ears, and that's, you know, for me it's a sense of coming home. So our time, we'll get cozy as the time goes on, but I do want to make sure I can cover all of this. I'm going to jump right into it instead of going through all of the introductions. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Stephanie, and I've always been interested in the study of the brain, psychology and the study of the brain. You know, the question of how does this amazingly complex nervous system make our behavior possible? You know, all the intricacies of behavior and the personality differences. So along the way, I got a PhD in neuroscience and ended up working as a professor for a number of years. It almost feels like telling someone else's story at this point. You know, it's like career 1.0. Oh, I remember that. And now to be in the yoga world is, well, it's quite a shift. But back in career 1.0, I was even an apprentice brain surgeon for a while. You know, and it's a very competitive and high anxiety field. And I bring this up because it's my own flavor of a personal testimonial. Because during those challenges of being in a very ultra-competitive academic environment, what kept me afloat, what kept me grounded, what was my go-to thing was heading to my mat. I would schedule it 4:30 every day. This is for me. And the peacefulness that I had on the mat was unlike what was going on in the rest of my life. Right? Here's this hour or 90 minutes, and then here's other. And I eventually had the light bulb moment of why does there have to be separateness there? Why can't I bring these two things together for me personally and indeed professionally? You know, at the time, so this was about 2006, and at the time there were just a few people, like count them on one hand, a few people in the United States starting to do yoga research, and I thought, well, I've got something to offer in this space, and this is what my heart is telling me to do. I was speaking to a few people last night who are interested in our yoga therapy program, and they were telling me what it is that they're doing and how they want to bring the practice of yoga more into their professional context, working with their students and clients. And you know, I hope you get a couple of gems to take home from this, but if nothing else, I want to repeat something that I said last night. Because for our generation, what our challenge is to find a unique kind of integration that has never been there before. And what it meant for me was leaving the lab, leaving the comfort zone. I'm much more comfortable to be reading a book or collecting data or in an Excel spreadsheet than to be in front of two cameras. The old models of, you know, you go to school, you get this diploma that says you're now in this career path, that pretty much has fallen away. And with all of you having this practice of yoga in your life, well, I really applaud you. And it can be a source of strength to find what is your passion and follow it, to find out what is your dharma, what is your unique life purpose. And the challenge of our generation is to forge new ground, forge new bridges, and to integrate things that haven't been integrated before. And we're going to talk about that in the context of these yoga research studies, right? We're breaking into new ground and really challenging what it means for healthcare research. We're putting the health back into healthcare. Hey, that's a novel concept. So I love talking about this stuff. If you have questions as we're going along, please feel free. If it's related right there to what we're talking about, if it's a burning question that that you're really interested in, but it's not exactly related, I'd ask you to hold it if you can until the end. And just like in Dallas, I'm going to stay here until the last person leaves. So I'm going to get all those questions answered. And I bet a lot of you have questions. You may have questions about how do you get involved in yoga research, and we can definitely talk about that. But as promised in your little description, that somehow inspired you to get here, and I'm amazed at the turnout. This is beautiful for me to see. So thank you so much. As promised in that little description, we're talking at the upper level here, the thematic level, the sociology of research, if you will. We're going to look at the field through a very broad lens and say, okay, well, what are the major trends? We'll drill down a little bit and talk about some specific studies, but for the most part, we're seeing, well, what is this field? What's it for? Where's it going? Sound good? Good deal. So according to my reading, there are 5 themes that have emerged from the yoga research literature. Many of you probably know that yoga is some pretty potent medicine. How many people in here have had a physical or psychological condition that they had been working with for a while that once they started practicing yoga, it's really improved? A few more? Yeah. That's part of my story as well. For me, it was depression and anxiety. And like I said, that life draft thing, right? Yoga was the life draft. Well, across a number of studies, we're seeing that yoga is real medicine. It has the ability to unlock the body's inherent, innate wisdom, even down at the cellular level. It's individualized treatment. So in medicine, often it's found, well, this drug works for 30% of the population, but the other 70%, oh gosh, we don't know what's happening there. Or if you get a certain diagnosis, your physician can say, well, the prognosis is this, but we know that based on statistics. How it's going to actually work for you? Well, in yoga, we do have somewhat of a guarantee, a stronger guarantee than that, which is do your practice, and the healing will come. Yoga is a form of tailored treatment, really. And as we go along, I'm going to introduce you to some different names outside of the Yoga Fit Network, and they may be sources where you want to read a bit more. Now, the Indian scholar who's considered the father of yoga therapy was a gentleman named Krishnamacharya, and his big push was about individualizing treatment. I'm going to bring it back to Yoga Fit for a minute. With this therapy program that we have, across 800 hours, we're giving you the tools to, as best as you can, facilitate healing in a very individualized, tailored, very specific way for clients. But at the same time, we hold so much trust in the practice itself, because again, it's about the body unlocking its inherent healing potential. So Krishnamacharya was the first to really talk about that you fit the yoga to the person, not the other way around. And this is the first of what may become several times where I'll say, in the West, we got it all wrong. We got it all wrong, at least a little bit wrong, in terms of if I ask you to picture who's on the cover of Yoga Journal, you've got a very specific idea in mind. It's pretty small demographic, and she is doing something that is physically impossible for many people in the population. So there's this idea of the perfect form, right? That body that person can embody that physical form so gorgeously that that's why she's the cover model. Then we have a friend here in the room who has been working with fibromyalgia for a while, and I ran into her on the elevator, and I said, I'm going to talk about this. Do you mind if I put you on the spot? So, Judy, can I put you on a spot for just a minute to talk about how it's helped you? Thank you.
I was like, I would go home, die, and go to bed. Teenagers in the house, didn't care, I hurt too bad, do anything. When you give your child your debit card, and you sit in the car for them to go grocery shopping, you know there's a severe problem going on. It took 2 years, 4 knee surgeries, to finally, for an orthopedic surgeon to say, no, you've got fibromyalgia. The neurosurgeon who did surgery in my neck in '92, when they kept sending me to him, they kept saying, you're crazy, go to work, there's nothing wrong with you. And then finally, like I said, back in '98, then finally in '98, this guy says, no, it's fibromyalgia. And you can try to work if you want to, but I don't think you can. So I was going to work in a casino in a wheelchair on the casino floor. They would sit me down at the table that I was working at. I would work, and then when I get back on my break, go back in the wheelchair and go back out to break. Get back in the wheelchair to go out the front door to go walk to my car to go home. And then finally she said, you can't do it because even the air conditioning would elevate in my legs to blow them up, and they just hurt so bad. So I worked through water therapy for quite a while in the water doing the swimming, and I found that where I'm living now, it was too hard to get back and forth to the water because I obviously came here in Georgia. I started doing yoga. I'm sitting in chair yoga and finding that I'm able to stretch my legs a little bit more. I was able to move, and I could not bend my knees. I could never sit like this. This took 10 years to be able to do this again. So now the knees feel better. I still have the trigger points that hurt, but now I'm teaching yoga, and people are looking at me going, you're our model child now. I want to be just like you. I still get tired from time to time. I still have some aches and pains, but nothing compared to that crying, severe pain that you just couldn't tolerate anymore. And it's just a complete turnaround. And it's all, I mean, I was walking with a cane, with a wheelchair, the whole thing, and my back hurt, this hurt, and that. Now, it's completely different person. I mean, hugging walls to walk around your own house. But yeah, I think it's a miracle that yoga, why somebody didn't say a long time ago, exercise.
How these benefits start to accumulate, and how much practice do you have to do in order to receive those benefits? Well, coming up with these themes is all about abstracting across many studies, right? And it's become pretty standard that yoga is studied in a way where we say, okay, 8 weeks of classes. So on the one hand, you could say it's a little bit of rigid thinking, right? We're getting very protocolized about yoga. And of course, some people don't even like using the word protocol or standardization around yoga. And, you know, perhaps rightfully so. The research is again, this is my opinion, right? The research in yoga is all about being able to shift systems and ultimately share the practice with many more people. So yoga research isn't for the people who are already practicing, right? You don't preach to the choir. Well, some people preach to the choir, but in this case, you know, yoga research for you guys, you know, I hope you're consumers of yoga research and can use the studies as a source of inspiration. But it really doesn't tell you, hey, you should practice. I mean, Amanda, you know. That's why you're here. don't need to read about it in a book. Right? So while it's becoming, while certain habits are forming, certain standards and the ways that these protocols are written have been forming. Okay, well that has been happening the last several years. But a breath of fresh air blew through last fall, which is the first time in the literature that people started discussing, well, how do the benefits accumulate over time? How much is enough? I mean, it's pretty amazing that something could shift you in just 8 weeks, right? With many different conditions, we can see statistically significant benefit in just 8 weeks. But you can take a step back from that and say, well, what, 8 weeks daily practice, 8 weeks for 2 hours every other day? What does that really mean? And so a smaller contingency, some folks are getting more specific around looking at the dose of yoga. And in pharmaceutical research, they talk about dose response curves, right? Like how many milligrams would be needed to achieve a certain therapeutic benefit. And so this actual term, dose response curve, is now being adopted inside of the yoga research literature. I want to point you to, it's got to be just a Google search right now because I'm not sure. It was taken down from the original site. So there was a talk that was done at a conference last fall by a woman named Dr. Kelly McGonigal of Stanford University. She was previously the editor of this journal that I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, the International Journal of Yoga Therapy. And she's a real innovator and an awesome human being to boot. And she did a very elegant talk about dose response curves and how that distributed practice. Okay, we talk about in psychology or in the study of how the brain works. We talk about distributing practice over time, and that allows the nervous system to integrate the benefits, right? That having little practice sessions, whatever the task is. If you're learning French, if you're learning how to, I don't know, crochet, if you're learning jujitsu, distributing it over time is much better than having, boom, the all-day marathon, the all-day quilting marathon. And likewise, we're seeing that with yoga. So one other person that I'd love to introduce you to, if you don't know of his work already, is Mark Whitwell. And one thing that is pretty unusual about Mark is that he was a direct student of Krishnamacharya. In fact, lived in Krishnamacharya's home for some period of time, several years in India. And Mark has a new book called The Promise. And based on his research for many decades now, he's come to see that a practice of at least 7 minutes a day is enough to have really profound shifts. Now, Mark comes from a tradition that Mark comes from a tradition that has a lot to speak about the qualities of relationship and non-duality and feeling connected with others. So in his book, he writes quite a lot about sex and relationships. And so he has these amazing testimonials. So now we're leaving the realm of we're leaving the realm of, yoga for depression, yoga for anxiety, yoga for something that's within your body, and moving into the realm of yoga for how you interact with other people. So Mark is really noteworthy in that way. So his new book is called The Promise, and he says if you make the promise to practice at least 7 minutes a day, whatever that's going to look like, then yoga makes the promise back to you, to heal you, and to make the quality of your relationships with others so much better. So he's a great example of, for years, he's been a proponent of this distributed practice model. So one thing that you could decide to do right now, and if an idea pops into your head, please, you can go ahead and say it. I'd like to encourage people to imagine integrating the practice into their daily lives, right? Because you get so busy, and you may have the best intention at the beginning of the day. You know, I'm going to practice on my lunch break. And then life, your work is busy, and you end up eating lunch at your desk, and there's not that time. So you say, I'm going to practice later in the afternoon. And then maybe that happens, and maybe it doesn't. And I'm seeing a lot of nods, right? It's sometimes a challenge to fit a big block of practice time into our day. And we beat ourselves up about it, don't we? How many yoga teachers beat themselves? How many of you guys beat yourselves up because you don't have a home practice? Okay, that's like a third of you, right? It's hard to make that promise to yourself. So what I've found, and I've heard from a number of people, is they come up with fun little rules for how they can integrate something that is really of benefit to them and tie it to an outside event or a certain time of day or whatever. Now the funniest thing that I've heard, remember when you were a kid and you played Herbie or Punch Bug or Chug a Bug, whatever it was called? So you're in the car and you see a Volkswagen Bug and you're with your friend and you know, it's like a little game, you're counting points. Chug a Bug blue, that's what the practice is all about. Bringing us back to where we are right now. So if it's the mindfulness ding, if it's the Mula Bandha bug, it's okay, here, now. And just having that mental appreciation of here and now can shift things very significantly, even on the cellular level. And so, in terms of the content, the intracellular content, and then the fluid extracellularly, a number of studies are showing great benefits. Yoga decreases inflammation. It decreases oxidative stress, so the free radicals that are in your body. Yoga somehow is smoothing those edges, so to speak. You may be able to think of some examples of people that have practiced yoga for many years, decades, let's say decades, and you look at them, like, does anyone know who Gurmukh is? And you look at her and you say, she's how old? Well, I hope I look like that when I'm that age, right? Part of it is that at the cellular level, oxidation isn't happening. Cells are not being atrophied as much as they would if you were a non-yoga practitioner. Cellular acidity is reduced. And when the body is more alkaline, more basic, you know, on the pH scale, that promotes healing more than acidity. So we'll get into inflammation a little more. If you're particularly, you know, inflammation is now being found as a core component of so many different diseases. And so it's an important thing to know about. It's something that is also directly connected to diet. And if you're particularly interested in inflammation, then I'll turn you on to a paper that's just about to come out. It's by this researcher who's at Ohio State, and her name is Janice Kiecolt-Glaser. And it's a mouthful of a name. It's Kiecolt-Glaser. She's a really significant player in the yoga research arena. And I can't claim to be an expert on the endocrine system. I'm learning more and more week after week about inflammation and all of these different kinds of, all these different classes of cells. So I'm going to keep this pretty general because in my head it's pretty general right now. Her work revolves around, well, this newest study revolves around a class of cells called cytokines. That's C-Y-T-O-K-I-N-E-S. And cytokines come in different flavors. Some of them are pro-inflammation, right? They rev the inflammation up. And others have a more healing response, so they're anti-inflammation. And in research, what we always love to see is a double dissociation. So if we hypothesize that, in this case, yoga should reduce inflammation, if we've got two chemical markers, one that increases when inflammation increases and one that increases when inflammation decreases, we've got a way of saying, okay, it's like two independent pieces of evidence that come back and confirm the hypothesis, the question at hand. And that's very elegantly exactly what she and her colleagues have done in this recent study. And so we're all about abstraction here tonight, right? So the rule of thumb that you can remember is that when you have practiced yoga for an extended period of time, which is about 2 years in her study, she breaks people into experienced practitioners and novice practitioners. So to be called experienced, you've been practicing at least 2 years. And those experienced practitioners have, at the cellular level, an inflammation rate that is 40% less than non-practitioners. And in this new study with the two different kinds of cytokines, the effect isn't quite as pronounced on the anti-inflammation side. So basically, yoga practitioners have less pro-inflammation chemicals floating around in their body. And it's not like completely mirror image perfect. The change isn't as great in their anti-inflammation, but still it's a coherent picture. But the anti-inflammation chemicals are a little more prevalent, but definitely the pro-inflammation guys have gone boom through the floor compared to our controls who aren't practicing yoga or have only been practicing for a short while, and their inflammation levels are still quite high. Okay. And that 40%, let's call it 30 to 40% because she's showing that across multiple studies, right? That's a pretty good agreement across multiple studies. So 30 to 40% lower inflammation from a regular practice of yoga, and that's going to be correlated with less depression, less anxiety, less chance of insulin resistance, less chance of, so obviously less chance of diabetes, less chance of atherosclerosis, why can't I say that, and heart disease, right? So having that one number go down produces a huge impact. Let me check in. Any questions yet? Are you guys digging this?
Yeah. Digging it.
Digging it. My floor sister. Well, trade places. You get up here on the hot seat. My inflammation, my energy's like, okay. Let's try to be coherent. Okay. So digging a little bit deeper, okay, we know these cellular changes are happening. The body is less inflamed. The body is less susceptible to, the body is less inflamed, less acidic, and less susceptible to oxidation. How is this happening? So this gets into, I'm going to lump together for a second here. What you have on your handout is 4 and 5. I'm going to introduce you to another big player in the yoga research world. And this is Chris Streeter, who's at Boston University. The very hot topic right now across many studies is how can yoga, documenting that yoga increases parasympathetic tone. Let's take one little step back. Let's make sure everyone's on the same page with parasympathetic, sympathetic. Okay? So we've got the central nervous system, that's the brain and spinal cord. And the peripheral nerves that branch off of the spinal cord fall into one of two categories. Okay? Together, those two branches are called the autonomic nervous system. These control automatic functions. Your pupils dilating, your heart rate, right? Your rate of digestion, You don't have to think about these things and plan them out. You know, if you forgot them, if you consciously forgot them, they'd still happen. Thank God, right? Because we have like 4 million things in our mind. Oh, I forgot to make my heart beat. So the autonomic nervous system is on autopilot, or not autopilot, but it's making things happen automatically. And it's got an accelerator and it's got a brake, right? And that accelerator is the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. And you might have heard this as the fight or flight system. So when we encounter danger, when someone challenges us or our safety is threatened, a whole cascade of chemical changes happen that prepare the body to either fight, to defend itself against this threat, or to flee, to get out of there, right? To escape the predator that's chasing you and trying to eat you. Now, of course, in human evolution, we don't deal so much with big predatory beasts that have huge incisors that are trying to take us apart, rip us apart, and eat us for lunch, right? We have other stressors. In actuality, we need good, strong activation from both in order to keep the balance. We're a group that loves to move. Let me get you to embody this principle. So if you want to, if you're busy taking notes, don't worry about it, but if you want to, stand up. You may want to come out into the middle of the room just a little bit. I'm going to have you adopt a standing balancing posture. And we're going to use this as an analogy. This doesn't mean that, I'm not talking about directly, this is what's going on in the parasympathetic nerves in your foot, the sympathetic nerves in your foot. It's an analogy. So when you stand in a balanced posture, and you're feeling pretty firmly rooted right now, and that means that there's a balance of forces for both of your feet, right? You don't feel that you're leaning over more towards the right or more towards the left. Boom, you're there. Look at you. You're there. Ready. You're ready. But if I have you change it up a little bit and go into one foot, now you can just lift your foot, you can go into dance, you can go into tree, but let's have you hold for a second, well, for more than a second. Have you hold for several seconds as I continue talking about this and building up this analogy. You have dynamic tension happening right now in your foot. Your foot is constantly correcting. Right? You can feel in your metatarsals, right? They're going up. Well, that's what we want for autonomic balance. Okay? So in this case, the analogy is going to the right a little bit would be one side of the nervous system, going to the left a little bit would be the other side of the nervous system. And what's keeping you in balance is that they are both right there. Okay? Does that make sense? Good balance, you guys. I probably would have fallen by now. Parasympathetic and sympathetic into balance. And it's the rate that has communication between heart and lungs in perfect accord. It's like a fine dance. This is something that I'm also studying a lot right now. You know, I thought I was going to be up here, neuroscientist in the brain, and now I'm like in the liver, in the heart. I'm trying to put all these pieces together, but this is my passion. So yeah, I'm just an unapologetic geek, and I just read a lot of different stuff. The book that I just started is called A Calm Brain, and it's by an MD named Gayatri Devi. And so she goes into this a little bit, describing the how and the why behind this optimal cardio and respiratory functioning at 6 breath cycles per minute. So a cycle is one inhale and one exhale. Okay, so if we're inhaling 6 times a minute and exhaling 6 times a minute, that's what's optimal. A minute, 60 seconds divided by 6, that's 10 seconds. So one way that this talk is all about applications for your brain, right? And so one way that you can put this into practice right away for yourself, or change languaging as you're coming to the tail of Mountain 3, and you're preparing your students for final relaxation, how do we want them to be breathing? Well, 6 cycles per second. And instead of suggesting just a 5-second inhale and a 5-second exhale, I'm going to change it up a little bit and say the exhale should be a bit longer. So a 4-second inhale. You can even pause if that's what feels comfortable. For some people, it'll bring up anxiety. But if it feels comfortable, have that little pause. And then a 6-second exhale. And it gets you very close to that optimal rate where heart and lungs are perfectly dancing together. I'm really big on this idea that yoga is all about taking care of the nervous system. And, you know, as we move ahead and have all of these different spin-offs on hatha yoga and competitions around yoga, we're getting, I mean, what happened to letting go of judgment and competition and expectations? We're getting into like the performance of yoga. Hey, I'm good at this. I can do this longer, better, faster. And when you approach your practice like that, which side of the nervous system do you think you're revving up? Sympathetic, right? I gotta be good at this. I'm relaxing right now. And so you're going totally in this opposite direction of your practice taking care of your nervous system. You might have been practicing for 90 minutes and now you're ready to like, right? That's going in the opposite direction that we want. And as a general rule, you know, there's just so much you can do with just the breath, right? So if you're in a tight space, if you're in a long road trip, whatever, you're stuck in a seat for a while, just being able to shift the breath, moving it more and more towards that optimal rate of 6 breaths a minute. Or if you're not quite there, and that's a deep breath for a lot of people, right? If you have beginners in class, or has anyone ever practiced Bikram yoga? Yeah, and I happen to love Bikram yoga. I did a daily practice there for a while. That was my 4:30 that I referred to earlier, because that was my class. You use the style. Let's practice this style of yoga. We'll know that you start with a timed pranayama. And it has kind of a bellowing arm movement with it. And I don't remember now. Do you remember the duration of the inhale and the exhale?
Yes, it's 6 on the inhale and 6 on the exhale.
Okay. And what do you think the average person is breathing on the inhale and the exhale? Because you can hear it, right? And you hear the people drop off.
3 or 4 is in the beginning, because
Yeah.
people don't. They just breathe all up here and
They
they're
breathe
all
up
done.
here.
And then they're done.
They're done. Yes.
They didn't learn to sip it in.
Mm-hmm. So the idea of a 10-second breath cycle that's pretty
and
intense.
You do it 10 times and then rest and do it 10 times more.
Perfect.
And then you
Thank you
think,
for the
I
reminder.
still have 89 minutes left. That's pretty challenging.
Like, okay, getting started. Yeah. It's a very loud breathing, so you could hear people drop off. So they start out, you know, it's like Darth Vader beside you. Like, well, sorry, that was a little frog in my throat, but you get the point. It's like big, deep inhale for like 3 seconds, and then they're like, and the exhale's open mouth, and so then they're like, and the exhale's so long. But the idea of even equalizing those two. And this is something that, going back to Mark Whitwell, he talks about this a lot. He talks about it in the context of feminine, masculine, Shiva, Shakti, or I should say, if I say Shiva, Shakti, I should say masculine, feminine. I should say not too many sounds in a row because I'm getting tongue-tied. He says that these concepts of the feminine and the masculine are represented in the duration of our inhale and our exhale. And if you go to Eastern cultures, these folks more readily have a balance between inhale and exhale. But in our culture, let's introduce yin and yang to it too, right? We're very good about the yang. Right? So when he teaches, he walks around. I've seen him do this several times, but I'm going to bust him. He walks around and he has us starting with our ujjayi breath. And then he stops and he says, where were you on the inhale? The inhale represents the feminine, the yin. And our society, of course, is a lot more like, boom, get things done, masculine, achieve, 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 yang. And so if you like this idea of Shiva Shakti and kind of bringing in the symbolism, if you're in a class where that would be appropriate, you can bring that notion of balance in and say, you know, if you are someone for whom the exhale is so dominant, where are you seeing that in other parts of your life? You know, is it the overachiever that has that Darth Vader exhale and can't receive on the inhale, has the little mouse at inhale? So in terms of increasing parasympathetic tone, simply lengthening the exhale, no matter what the duration of the cycle is going to really have a soothing effect. And I can tell you from my personal experience, I've had migraine headaches for most of my life. And when I got introduced to pranayama, that was a game changer for me. You know, I'd gone to, over my life I've gone to a few different neurologists, I've tried a lot of different meds. Basically nothing works. What worked? Well, nothing pharmaceutical works. Pranayama works. Yoga fit training?
Because yoga is my medicine and it makes me healthy.
So we need to hear that.
Did you hear it? Did you capture it?
I did, but you were...
Way to go. I knew.
She's good.
Armed and dangerous, yes?
She doesn't play.
So can you get that piece out of that?
I sure can.
It's the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so the sound mantra program is going to be working on healing. Sound is healing. And using mantras, using sound vibration, toning, and then we're going to work on going to a sound dome and doing a sound healing bath, as well as doing a yoga practice in the sound dome using all different types of sounds. So it's going to be really exciting.